welcome back to It's an Inside Job podcast. I'm your host, Jason Lim. Now, this podcast is dedicated to helping you to help yourself and others to become more mentally and emotionally resilient so you can be better at bouncing back from life's inevitable setbacks. Now, on It's an Inside Job, we decode the science and stories of resilience into practical advice, skills, and strategies that you can use to impact your life and those around you. Now, with that said, let's slip into the stream. Hey folks, welcome back to the show. I'm your host, Jason Lim. Are you interested in being a more resilient leader, creating a more resilient team? Well, today, that's what you're going to learn in this long-form conversation. Today, I am privileged and pleased to have Shelly Brown with me today. So who's Shelly? Well, she's worked in large multinational organizations, and in her last executive role, Shelly led the HR function in a global healthcare organization, and it became a top employer of choice in Canada. Now, throughout her career, Shelly has gained valuable HR experience in organization development, employee relations, management, and leadership development. That's 4 decades of experience and knowledge that she's going to share with us today. So if you're curious to learn how to create more cohesive teams, to create a sense of well-being and a strong sense of psychological safety amongst your team, if you want to create more engagement, motivation, and inspiration, well, I think this long-form episode is for you. So without further ado, let's slip into the stream and meet Shelly Brown. Well, I'd like to welcome everyone back to the show. Today, I have Shelly Brown with me. Shelly, welcome.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, we're connecting between Oslo and Ontario. I was wondering, could we kick off the conversation by you introducing who you are and briefly what you do?
Sure. So my name is Shelly Brown, as you said. I've worked in human resources my entire career, and I've worked in small companies, I've worked in big companies, and this concept of caring is something that was always with me. I'll tell you a bit more. My background, my education is in psychology. I joined the corporate world in human resources, eventually worked for different multinational organizations, became the vice president of human resources for a large healthcare company here in Canada, relocated to Montreal, Quebec to take that job on. Led the HR team there for 8 years before I started my own HR consulting company. So started that in November of 2007, built it up and ran that organization for 14 years before selling the company and stayed for 2 years of transition. And now I'm on my own doing some consulting just as 9box HR. And people ask me, where does the name 9box HR come from? And in the HR world, a 9box grid is how we look at talent in many different ways in the organization. Performance, potential, engagement, all of that kind of thing. So that's where the name comes from. But I want to go back to when I started my own company. One of the things that was foundational for me was having a core value of caring. I really feel that that's something that's often missing in the corporate world. And when I do see it, I see such positive results for everyone, for the employee, for management, for the business results, all of it. Once people feel that they're genuinely cared about, that they're engaged, they're passionate about what they're doing, how can the business not benefit from that? So that was the core foundation that I built my own consulting business on. And it's one of the things that I love to talk about now in various speaking engagements.
Well, that's brilliant because I'd really like to sort of narrow and focus our conversation, maybe go narrow and deep on that particular topic of caring. Because as we talked about sort of pre-episode when we first had our meet and greet, is that one of the major themes on this podcast, as you know, Shelly, is resilience. And that could be resilience with individuals, teams, and organizations. And caring is obviously an integral part of resilience and what that means. And so I'd really like to explore that with you today. And as part of the research on background, you have 40 years, or sorry, 4 decades worth of HR experience. And one of the things I read is that you've learned from both the bad, the good, and the great, all the leaders at different levels throughout your long career. I was wondering, could we kick off the conversation by maybe defining what caring means in the sense of resilience in the organization as you see it?
Yes, absolutely. Maybe to answer that, I'll go back to one piece of the puzzle that really did influence me a lot in my thinking.
Hmm.
And that was back in 1999, the Gallup organization did a ton of research in this whole area of employee engagement. And as a result, they wrote a book called The War for Talent. So some of your listeners may be familiar with it. It's an oldie but a goodie, and it still applies. And all of their research came out that they found that there's 12 drivers of engagement that we as human beings want in our work. One is I know what's expected of me at work. Another one is I have the materials and equipment I need to do my work well. At work, I have the opportunity to do what I do best every day. In the last 7 days, I've received recognition or praise for doing good work. My supervisor or someone at work seems to care about me as a person. There is someone at work who encourages my development. At work, my opinion seems to count. The mission or purpose of my company makes me feel that my job is important. My fellow employees are committed to doing quality work. I have a best friend at work. And in the last 6 months, someone at work has talked to me about my progress. And this last year, I've had the opportunity at work to learn and grow. So I think that's a pretty comprehensive list. It's only 12 sentences, but I think that really defines what people want. And it doesn't sound that hard, does it?
No, it sounds pretty much like a healthy, functional relationship in whatever sphere, per se.
Exactly. And yet, so many organizations miss the mark on this.
Hmm.
And I think that it's because what rewarded gets repeated, right? So what kind of behaviors are we rewarding in an organization? Are we rewarding people for for hitting that sales target? Are we rewarding them for cutting those budgets? Are we rewarding them for, getting a product to market earlier than was intended, which is all good because that needs to take place. But are we also rewarding them for how they treat their people? Because let's face it, without the employees in the organization is nothing. So I think that that's been part of the issue is that if people are not being measured and rewarded for being good managers and leaders, then some will do it because it's part of their personality and it's part of who they are. Others will not. And some organizations that have a toxic culture may even reward managers for being harsh with their people and pushing their people. And that's when we start to see, yes, you'll get short-term results, but you'll have long-term pain because that's when you'll have high turnover, you'll have low engagement, you're going to have maybe even something as terrible as sabotage if people are that unhappy. So I just think that there's a real business case for caring about your people. And the other thing, if I can switch gears just for a minute,
Please.
is there's been this study about something called discretionary effort that we all put in effort in our jobs, right?
Hmm.
And we get the job done. If you're happy, engaged, and feel cared about, people will go the extra mile. They'll access that discretionary effort that we all have, right? So if you really like who you're working with and for, then you're going to put in that extra the extra effort, the extra idea, the extra time, whatever it might be. And how does that not benefit everyone?
I mean, it's almost a given, right? But as you said, but I think what you said about the short term, long term sort of rewards is very important because we can, as a business culture, focus too much on the sort of the numbers, the transactional sort of interfaces, right? And that becomes the burning thing. As important as that is, but what I also hear, especially these 12 sentences from that book, what was it?
War for talent.
Yeah, the war for talent. Those speak, well, many of them at least do speak a lot to building within the business culture or the company culture, psychosocial emotional intelligence. And as any human being knows, regardless of the technology we have and the advances we have, at the end of the day, that human relationships, they are the core cohesive units of any group, whether it's a sport team, a music group, or a corporation, at least from my perspective. And again, I only speak from my experience.
I totally agree. Totally agree. And I think we've all worked in places where you got a great group of people. They like each other. They enjoy what they're doing. The manager is, has a good relationship with the team. And then we've worked in places that don't have that, right? And the difference is palpable. And the first scenario is what keeps us there, right? No one's going to stay long in a place where they don't feel appreciated, if they feel that they're being treated poorly, if they don't get along with their coworkers, or their coworkers are not pulling their weight, or the manager is playing favorites, or or even being punitive with some of the team members. So it's something that I think is so basic, but still that there's a lot of organizations that don't quite get it.
Wholeheartedly agreed. And actually, it does. I think the old saying is people don't leave the company, they leave their managers and such. But there's also to speak to those people that may not have the privilege nor the luxury of leaving a job because that's the only paid work they can get. And I think that comes back to something else that an astute point you said. If people feel that they are not respected, then that leads to sabotage behavior, or more specifically, maybe passive aggressive tendencies, right? That undermine the
Absolutely.
company in whatever ways that shows up.
Absolutely. There was one example of an organization that I'm familiar with where someone was working in the sales operations group, did not like his manager, felt that he was being treated badly. He did eventually quit, but right before leaving, he took down the entire sales tracking system, like the CRM, and so that was very telling in terms of how he felt about the organization.
I mean, that behavior is never acceptable. It's reprehensible, actually. But it shows the signage of what's going on in that particular business culture, per se.
Yeah.
So,
And
please.
this is one of the reasons I'm a huge fan of 360 leadership assessments. That leaders, we need to be held accountable for our behavior as leaders. And I don't mean accountable in a bad way, that always has a bit of a negative connotation. But so few organizations use 360s on a regular basis, where managers get feedback from their direct reports, their peers, their manager, and perhaps other people in the organization that they deal with, maybe internal customers, maybe external clients, who knows. But I think that there needs to be a temperature check on our managers and leaders to make sure that they're on track. And if they're having a hard time in a certain area, and they may, back to your point of self-awareness, maybe they're not even aware of some of the things that they're doing that are detrimental to their teams. A 360, hopefully, if people feel safe and are candid and honest, will uncover that. And that's one of the strategies that I think is important in a caring organization, is to make sure that we're measuring behaviors that go along with that.
Yeah, I think 360 as a principle is a very, very good tool. It allows awareness as to what is working well and what is not working so well. But I guess in some cultures, if we can say it's bordering on toxic, if we can just use that as a general word, I guess 360s can also be quite threatening to those employees who have a bad manager. But let's say that manager, he or she, upwards, they're the nicest, cordial, and most direct people, what have you. But when it comes downwards, people see a completely different face, almost like Jekyll and Hyde. And I guess those people on the team members who need that job, who need that income to come every month or whatever, every second week, I guess to some extent, unless the team is big enough where it can be anonymous, usually I understand it's 5+ where you can run a 360 with sort of direct reports. I guess it can be a little bit of a threatening situation for smaller teams where there's, 3 or 4 people per se. I mean, Are there other ways of trying to measure things to keep it anonymous, or there's just no way of knowing per se?
Yeah, I mean, I think that measurement is important, because what gets measured gets repeated as well. So I think there's a few things. One, skip level interviews, so that if you're my boss, then at least once a quarter, your boss should talk to me or talk to the team, right? So number one. Number two, I think that there should be employee engagement surveys that are being done, and that way it's the whole organization, right? And it's not just targeted directly at you giving feedback about your manager, it's about the whole organization. Focus groups. I think that if the organization is big enough, quarterly, just choose 8 employees and, do a stop, start, continue. What do we need to stop doing, start doing, continue doing as an organization, just to open up the conversation. Of course, there has to be food at this focus group, because food is always going to make people happy and more willing to talk. Okay. Yeah. And things like, we look at exit interviews, right? If someone is leaving the organization, it's important to get their feedback about why they're leaving and what, at that point, some people are still hesitant to share, but definitely people are more open to talk about their experience in the organization. I think that looking at onboarding surveys as well. I'm a big fan of, if someone is joining the organization, number one, they have to have a really good onboarding plan, but we interview them about their experience at 30 days, 60 days, and 90 days. So that at this point, they're still new, they're still learning. They're not caught up in any politics yet, hopefully. So they're going to give you some honest feedback. So it really does come down to soliciting feedback and making sure that we have open communication, both on an anonymous level and on an in-person level. I think that you're right. If it's a small team and people are worried about anonymity and they're worried about confidentiality, it does put them in a difficult spot. But I think that we still do need to make the effort to providing a forum for them to talk. And even if as a leader, like if we as a leader get a little whiff of an issue, then We need to dig into that. So once a year, I also am a big fan of calibration, which is looking at each department on its own with the leadership team. So let's look at how is everybody doing? How many stars do you have in your department? Do you have how many meets expectations? How many concerns? Who's struggling in your department? If you have a department that has more people that are struggling, there's a little whiff of a problem, right? If we have a department where we have higher than normal turnover, there's a whiff of a problem. If we have trouble attracting people to work in the department, there's a whiff of a problem. And so that's when we need to look at the leader's behavior. There was one leader that I came into the organization to do an assessment, and it was clear to me within the first 2 weeks that the leader of that function was toxic. And it turns out people were so stressed that they were actually becoming physically ill at work.
Wow.
And so, my first recommendation to the CEO is that this guy has to go now. And I think that's part of what we need managerial courage to deal with anyone who is toxic and creating these kinds of problems in the organization, because it has to cascade from the top, right? Like, we have to be role models as far as what we want to see in the organization.
I think it's such an astute point. Again, I only speak from my experience working with the corporations that I work with, Shelly, is that a lot of the times I can see, now I'm not talking about the company itself, but let's say a particular team leader or what have you, they hire people generally only based on competency, education, background, skill level. Now, of course, that's important. But when I put that in the light of a book I read several years ago by Simon Sinek, he did a research with I think it was the Navy SEALs or something like that, where they have a graph where there's high performance or high competence, and then there's from low to high psychosocial emotional intelligence. They found the ones that were the most detrimental, and I know you know this, but I'm speaking more, I guess, to the greater audience here, is that when you have the high performance, the high competent people, but they have very low social emotional intelligence, that's more of a detriment, to the team than having someone who's sort of mid performer and developing competence, but this individual, he or she has quite high psychosocial emotional intelligence. And that kind of would speak a lot to the example you would share. I don't know if I'm taking liberties, but that's kind of the connections I see.
Absolutely. I completely agree. And this is why psychometric testing, I think, is important when we're hiring someone to look at, what are their leadership competencies? What is their psychosocial profile? Like what do they have in addition to the education, experience, and competencies of the technical aspects of the job? And one of the things that is a problem and a remedy is that so often we promote people because of their technical capabilities, right? And they're good people. But then we throw them into this new job where they're managing 12 people. And sometimes it's their peers that they just used to be working with, and now they're the manager, right? Or you bring someone in from the outside who is ready for that next role. But we don't give them any tools to help them when it comes to management and leadership. And that's so unfair. We have to set people up for success and give them the tools that they need. And one of the things that I developed when I had my own consulting company was I saw this was a huge problem. And so in so many organizations, so I developed something called Manager Bootcamp. And it's to give all of the foundational skills of being a good people manager. we know you've got the technical capabilities. You've proven that. Now let's give you the skills and practice. So I wanted to make it very experiential. So as much as everybody hates role plays and all that kind of thing, that's part of the training that you actually have to do it. But the design of the program is, first we look at self-awareness. It's not about, you cannot manage other people, in my opinion, unless you have a level of self-awareness about yourself. And, in emotional intelligence, we talk about self-awareness and self-management as two of the pillars. And so the first day is all about self-awareness. So we do some psychometric personality typing. We do an emotional intelligence assessment. We do a conflict assessment. How do you manage conflict? All of that kind of thing. So day one is all about you and understanding your own tendencies. So how do you communicate? How do you make decisions? How do you organize your work? How do you take in information? And then to help them understand that not everyone does it in the same way that you do. Mm-hmm. So I really like an oldie but a goodie, the Myers-Briggs personality type indicator. And so I am an extrovert, but if I'm managing an introvert, I need to adapt my style to what's more effective in terms of communicating with an introvert. I'm a big picture thinker, but one of my employees, Kim, she was much more of a step by step by step. And so when I was giving her instructions on a project, I would kind of skip along the top and she would look at me with a big question mark over her head. And I realized, okay, I need to adapt my style to what she needs from me, right? So day one is all about just raising your own self-awareness and how to adapt your style to other people. And then the next day or two, some of my clients split it over 2 days, is really the core about how to manage people effectively, how to give feedback, how to have a good one-on-one meeting, how to give positive recognition, how to give corrective feedback, how to do a performance appraisal, how to, all this kind of stuff. And so back to, we need to set our managers up for success. This is one of the core things about creating a caring organization, is giving them the tools that they need through training and development, through coaching, through all of the things that are going to help them be better leaders.
And these are the fundamentals of your, what do you call it? The manager's boot camp, Shelly's boot camp, right?
Yes.
You take them through the fundamentals. So they learn to become self-aware and maybe manage themselves, but is part of that training how they deal with stress, how they deal with uncertainty, how they can deal with anxiety? Because as you talked about, it's about managing work, it's about communication, decision making. And when we are under some sense of threat, right, or we feel threatened, and then maybe just a paper tiger that we've converted into a tiger, but obviously that's going to change our mind state or our mindset, how we communicate, right? We're going to be, or at least most people will tend to be more reactive. So there's the trigger and then there's the response and there's no space in between. It's just like bang. So would that be part of the boot camp, is understanding how we show up to stress or duress, yes. I guess I should say, more specifically, negative stress?
Yes. And we actually go through a whole exercise on trigger and response, where people identify what are their triggers. And what I love about it is that people typically don't even think about what their triggers are. I mean, and so when they go through this exercise of defining what triggers them and then what that looks like, right? So is it fight or flight? Is it fight, flight, or freeze? Is it, what is it? And how then, what are some strategies to keep those disruptive impulses from taking over, right? And everyone has different strategies that work for them. So it's identifying what those are, and then putting them into practice back on the job.
Yeah, I remember I had to run a small team to run a sort of quite a big corporate workshop. And one of the consultants I had, I mean, they were all very highly competent and they were quite psychosocially intelligent too. And but my challenge was with one of them, when something went wrong, he would he would never take responsibility. He would always find some of the shift blame. And in one particular episode, I discovered what my trigger was, right? Because unfortunately, maybe I didn't handle it in the most appropriate way. It was away from the client, but I think that is so important. Sometimes we don't realize what our triggers are until we're put into that situation, because maybe those triggers, they don't get pulled. Maybe they're sort of once in a blue moon, right? And so I completely think that's such an astute point, because I completely concur with you. Most people don't know what their triggers are, and I think that's part of self-management, self-reflection.
I do think you brought up a really good point about accountability.
Mhm.
And this is something, again, it's so interesting that lately I've been having a lot of conversations with many clients about accountability
Mhm.
and them wanting training on accountability and wanting to instill a greater sense of accountability. And so it's something I've been doing some research into. And actually, if we go back to our 12 drivers of engagement, back to the Gallup survey, the War for Talent, I know what's expected of me at work is the first one. And so to me, this is one that I come back to over and over again. I know what's expected of me. So if I know what's expected of me, then I can deliver on that if I choose, if I choose to, right? And that I have all the materials and equipment to do my work well, which is the second statement in the 12 drivers. But do managers know what's expected of them in terms of leadership behavior? Right? And I know I'm kind of sounding like a broken record, but this whole idea of cascading down, but leaders holding managers accountable for it. So, for example, one of the things that we did in my last corporate role was I had the privilege of working with, well, there was 5 presidents in 8 years. One of them, like many of them were great. This one guy, I loved him. And he felt so strongly about this that he made 15% of the management incentive was tied to how well they managed their teams. So 15% of an executive level incentive is a pretty good stash of cash. So there was some real money attached to being a good leader. And it created some accountability then, right?
For sure. I guess that comes back from, for example, the 360 feedback or the focus groups or exit
Engagement
interviews when
survey
people are.
results, exit interviews. Sorry, I interrupted you. Sorry
No,
about
no,
that.
not at all. But it's just to go back to some of those things you were talking about, other than the 360 exit interviews, focus groups, as you said, employment engagement surveys and such, and that, because you can't control that. You may, but you can influence that by how you interact and you treat your direct reports.
One of the measures too was the quality of the performance appraisals. So everybody hates performance appraisals, everybody, right? But when you have a good one, it's really like it's like such a good discussion. So everybody hates writing it, gathering the input. It's so much work. Why does HR make us do this? Nah, 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 nah. But when you have that really great discussion, it's amazing. So one of the things that that the president and I talked about was there was an analysis of the quality of the performance appraisal for each person in that department, and that was one of the factors in the measurement of the leader for that 15% of their bonus. So So there were some things they could control, which was that. And then the 360, of course, the employee engagement, the onboarding surveys, like an exit interview, results, all that kind of thing. But I think that it really sent a message about what was important.
Now, in the first part of my conversation with Shelly Brown, we talked pretty much about resilience, what it takes to build resilient teams, individuals, and organizations. Shelly talked about a book called The War for Talent, where it covers 12 dimensions of engagement. Now, some of those points stood out to me. One was, I know what is expected of me. Another one, I have the opportunity to do what I do best every day. Or the last 7 days, I've received recognition or praise. Another one, there's someone at work who encourages my development. Another one, my opinions seem to count. And the one other one that really stood out to me is in the last 6 months, someone has talked to me about my progress. I mean, none of these points are revolutionary or complete eye-openers. They are basically the foundational principles of building any professional relationship, or pretty much any relationship in an organization. Shelly made a very salient point. She said, what is rewarded gets repeated. And the question she poses to each one of us, if we work in an organization, is, so what are we rewarding? How are we treating our people? As you consider that question, also consider another point she brought up called discretionary effort. This is when people feel engaged, they'll go the extra mile for that team, for that organization. They will bend over backwards. Why? Well, because they feel valued, they feel connected, and they feel secure in their position. So to build any relationship, it requires investment in time and in effort. And that means there is huge dividends when we do it. And that could be through feedback sessions and one-to-ones where we coach and we spar with our people to understand their development, to understand their points of view, to hear from them. But in the hustle and bustle, in the business and in the short-term thinking that a lot of organizations are driven by, sometimes these elements fall through the cracks. Of course, this is easier said than done, but if we are cognizant to take the time to invest in our people, to communicate, collaborate, and cooperate with them, to give them feedback, to coach them, as Shelly said, there's huge returns on those investments. So let's now slip back into the stream, part 2 with my fascinating conversation with Shelly Brown. For resilience for any organization, any team is basically the heart of this conversation, is caring. And I agree with you. Many people really do not like performance appraisal because they just think, oh, it's another HR loop. I just got to, hoop. I got to jump through. And it's just part of this admin. But what I've found over the time working with different organizations is that if linked to one-to-ones, so at the end of the year, if the performance appraisal is just seen as the end station of a series of one-to-ones, then, because a lot of people who just have performance appraisal at the end of the year, again, I speak anecdote from my own experience, is that it's just like, okay, I can't really remember what Jason did or how he performed 6 months ago. But if a manager's had, let's say once every second week for 20 to 30 minutes, just a touchdown, a one-to-one, getting feedback, there's this red thread that connects all this dot. It's all about development. It's not always about evaluations, but it's just about these developments. And so by the time you get to the performance appraisal, it's not a big thing. It's just, okay, it's just another conversation, but it's the end point of this year. And we can see there's nothing hidden. Everything's being transparent. Again, this is from my particular experience. But I think also one-to-ones to create a caring organization, it's not just always the responsibility of the manager to give feedback, but it's also, for me, it's always been an arena, a forum in which the employee can give feedback to the manager. But of course, that manager, he or she has to encourage that. But that creates, I think, this sort of feedback loop that goes both ways, a two-way road instead of just a monologue.
The importance of one-on-one meetings, I can't stress enough. And what I always encourage is that it's the employee's agenda, right? So the employee can bring forward, an update on their projects, how they're doing, what resources they need. anything that they need from the manager.
Mm.
And then the last bit is the manager talking about, letting them know what's, any new information that they have within the organization, where maybe some discussion around, around how this might fit into their objectives for the year, their development, that kind of thing. But you brought up such a good point that I want to jump on, is part of a caring organization is developing your people. And that is one of the things, I did a bit of research before just to see if there was any additional information about creating a caring organization. And one of the things that came up, and I completely agree with, is that it's about developing your people from a career perspective. And career, it doesn't always mean that I go from being a sales rep to a district sales manager, right? Like your typical vertical career development promotion kind of thing. But it could also mean that the scope of your job goes from small scope to bigger scope. You're in the same job, but you're taking on some additional responsibilities that are more interesting for you. And hopefully that also means getting rid of some of the boring day-to-day stuff that takes up time. It can also mean that you're looking at different departments across the organization. But that concept of a manager supporting learning, skill development, acquisition of new skills, and career development is a huge part of creating a caring organization. And what that means is you actually need to listen to your employees and ask the question, so, what have you learned, in the last 6 months? And, where are you interested in going in your career? And it's okay to stay. It's okay to stay in your current role. That's fine. But if you have, but you still need to learn new skills just to stay in your current role. But if you have an interest in going into marketing, or you have an interest in going into government affairs or whatever, then the manager, number one, needs to give honest feedback. If there's still some things that they need to work on, then let them know and help them and encourage them and provide the resources to do that. But if you feel they're ready in the next 12 months, then say, well, let's talk about what we can do to get you exposure to those kinds of roles so that when an opening comes up, you're ready. And I think we need to also think outside the box. So just from my own experience, when I was head of HR at this healthcare organization, big company, one of the things I hated about my job, and I say that with a lot of passion, that I hated was dealing with budgets, payroll, stock options, pension, all this kind of stuff. It is not my core competency. Okay. Give me like everything else, but this, I was never great at it. I was okay at it, but not great. And I really didn't enjoy it at all. So, when my director of compensation and benefits role came open, I thought, I'm going to think differently about this. So I had a look in our finance department, and there was a director there who I thought had a lot of potential to get a cross-function, that she might be interested in a cross-functional career move. So I took her to lunch and said, have you ever considered, moving out of finance and coming into HR? We talked about the job. We talked about the there's a nice crossover to finance. Anyway, long story short, she accepted the job and made my life like so much easier, and did a fantastic job. And it actually opened up a new career path for her. She went on to become vice president of human resources after that. Of course, I have to tell you, her buddies in the finance department were like, you're doing what? That's ridiculous.
Yeah.
But non-traditional career move, right? very non-traditional career move. And if your people are interested, or they may not have even thought about it, let's open up those conversations and explore different things that might be available, hopefully inside the organization, but sometimes it means they have interests outside the organization. And if that's the case, that's a tougher one to support, but it's something that we still should do. When I was running my own HR consulting firm, I had just an amazing team. And so I'd hired three people right out of university. And my goal for them was to get them exposure to all kinds of core HR, but then send them to go work inside an HR department, inside an organization, because that's what they needed for their next career move. And we talked about that all the time. So each of them stayed with me for more than 5 years and then moved into another organization. And that was the best thing for them. And I still got 5 years of great employees.
It just shows you that one-to-ones are not just some sort of fixed formula, some sort of template you have to fill out. A one-to-one, I think, as you've said, it's fundamental to a caring organization, because within that forum between manager and direct report, a lot can be said. I mean, a team could be high performance. They're all great communicators and they get along very well. But there's always going to be some topics that are too sensitive to bring up in an open forum of the team. And it creates an encapsulated, safe place where things can be discussed, or topics or issues can be discussed. Of course, the trust and the transparency have to already been invested into have those kind of conversations. But I think also, back to your point, it's also a place to ask about that, about career development, well, whether it's the traditional vertical or like a lateral move that you've talked about with your former colleague. And I think it's just that sometimes we can ask a little more unorthodox questions, like, what are you really passionate about? What really lights your fire? I mean, we can use different vernacular terminology to trigger different types of thinking. And that is just that. I think that's a really good way of finding out what people are motivated by. And also, another one-to-one, it could also be, because I have a lot of managers that are so well-meaning and they want to motivate, encourage their people. So they're racking their brains about it. And sometimes I just say, well, why don't you just go to the well to draw the water? Why don't you just maybe have a 2-hour workshop on some Tuesday morning, ask people, lay out some of the questions, what they would like to see done, what would motivate them, or what can create more engagement, and just have a good conversation around that. But give them a few days to actually think. Don't just drop the question on them, because most people blank out. So I think, anyway, sorry, I'm going on about, but I think one-to-ones for me are the DNA, or at least the building blocks of a very, not very, but a caring organization or a caring culture.
I totally agree. Totally agree. And to your point of just asking the employees, what interests you? What do you like about your job? What do you not like about your job? What are some things you've seen in the organization you'd like more exposure to? One of my employees at my consulting firm, her name is Christina, and just a bundle of energy and a bundle of ideas and a bundle of questions. And I just loved working with her. And I really saw that she had potential to do training. And so one of the things she was really interested in is generations in the workplace. So we decided to offer for free to our clients that Christina would come in and do a 1-hour like lunch and learn or micro learning program for free. The client gets something out of it, and then I get a chance to give her the opportunity to do something she loves, right? And to get better at it. And I was with her, like for the first 4, I went with her just to make sure she felt supported, and that if she ran into any problems or, froze or whatever. And then after that, she went on her own, and her abilities took a huge leap forward in terms, and now That's her area of focus for her career is learning and development. And she's fantastic at it, like fantastic. So it's helping to uncover what are those passions and what do people want to do and how can we be creative about giving them that opportunity.
I mean, it's such a, again, it goes back to at the trailhead of this conversation when you listed the 12 um, things that organizations or managers can focus on to create engagement and retention and all those other great words. But it is sometimes it's just sitting down and have that conversation because when a person feels that they can articulate their passions, their interests, and their wishes, and that you're actually listening, not that you can probably float all those boats, but some of them you can try to take and move to action. Because I think that's the other thing. You can have a great conversation, but if it just ends at a conversation and there's no action as a consequence of that conversation, then I think that there's that can seed some doubts. But I think if you follow through with that, I think that's really interesting. I was just, I'm sorry, please.
Can I jump on something that you said earlier? So I think asking your people what you were saying, go to the well and ask. I think that is such an important point. And that means being vulnerable as a manager or a leader, right? You don't know what you're going to hear. So one of the things I'm a huge proponent of is it's meant to be when you're taking over a new team, but this can be done at any time. I facilitate expectations meetings for my clients. So let's say that there's a new manager of customer service group, let's say, coming in. She's been hired. She's going to be managing 12 customer service reps. So they don't know her. She doesn't know them. So within the first 6 weeks, what I always recommend is let's set you up for success. So the questions, we get the group together. The manager says, I want you guys to be totally candid and honest. Anything goes as far as putting it on the table. The manager leaves, and I ask the group, what do you know about Shelly, the new customer service manager? What would you like to know about her? What would you like her to know about you as a team? And where we spend most of our time is, and what are your expectations of Shelly as your new manager? What do you expect of her? So it can be anything from, I expect her to answer my emails within 24 hours. I expect her to tell me if I'm doing something wrong. I expect her to give us some positive feedback. I expect her to celebrate birthdays in the team. I expect her to fight for resources for us. I expect her to tell us what's going on in the organization. I expect her to look at our workload, whatever it might be, right? So then the manager comes in, we take a break. The manager comes in and the team then presents their feedback. What do we know about you? What would we like to know about you? Are you a dog person, a cat person?
Okay,
what kind of movies do you like? Whatever, right? What would we like to know about you? What we would like you to know about us. We're a good team. We communicate well. We're blah, 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 blah. And then the expectations. So then the manager has a chance to respond to the expectations to say if those are reasonable expectations or not. Then the manager presents her expectations of the team. I expect you to let me know when there's a problem. I expect you to, to come to our one-on-ones on a regular basis. I expect you to make the customer a priority. I expect you to understand the system, whatever it might be, right? So it eliminates some of the guesswork about what we expect of each other, but it also then gives the manager kind of an immediate checklist of how to show that they care about
That's a
the
brilliant.
team.
I love that whole idea of expectation meetings and those specific questions because it creates clear guidelines, I guess, as to expectations both ways, right? It's not sort of intangible and abstract. It becomes very concrete and tangible, right? And of course, we can always expand on each of those. But I really like that because that, I guess, that comes back to point one of that 12 points: managing expectations, or I know what I'm expected to do or deliver.
Exactly, exactly. And anytime I've facilitated this, both like the employees say, I've never done this before. This was so good. And the manager then says, okay, this is cool. Like I know what they want from me. And then 3 months later, do a little check in. Okay, guys, how am I doing? This is what you expected of me. How am I doing? And then this is what I expected of you. And how do you think you're doing? Like, and it doesn't have to be a long conversation, but it creates some accountability. And it also shows that it's not just a one way, the manager, I expect this of you, right? We're human beings. We need to, like one of the things that it talked about the drivers of engagement is at work, my opinion seems to count. Mm. So it's soliciting that feedback. And this is where the caring organization is created through relationships. And so it's and it takes time. I think that's one of the challenges is that everyone is so busy that we need to take the time to do it. I remember one of my employees when I had my consulting firm, I was in my office and I was deep in thought. I had my door open, and I was on my computer and I was deep in thought. And Carl came up and he said, "Hey, Shell." And I looked at him and I said, "Yeah, but I didn't take my hands off the keyboard." Right? So the message that's sending to him is, you've got my attention for the next 3 seconds and then I got to get back to work. So I have a choice there. I can say, you know what, I'm really in the middle of something. Can we talk in 30 minutes? Mm. Or I make a choice to take my hands off the keyboard, turn and say, yeah, come on in. But like that in between thing is, it's not great. So
well, it creates uncertainty, right? It creates uncertainty. Yeah. Like, okay, should I engage or should I disengage? How much should I give? Or, there's, instead of asking questions, they've got all these other things. I don't want to bother Shelly, or, I see she's busy. But I think that's very important what you said, right? Because managers say, oh, I have an open door policy. And then I hear in our coaching session, Jason, I have no time to do anything. My people keep approaching me. And I said, well, what do you think you can do? And when I asked that question, most of them says, you know what? I should just tell them when I'm busy and that they can gather the questions, unless it's a critical thing, of course, but some outlier, that's different. But I'm talking within the general scope of things. Maybe at the bottom of the hour, they can come to me with all their questions, or we book a particular time with something, right? Again, this, you have to create more bespoke depending upon the environment and the pressures. But I think that's also a way of creating a caring organization from my perspective, is that a manager, he or she is there to support, but he or she is there also to get their work done. Otherwise, they're going to go into a reactive stress state, and this distress is going to not help with their communication. But I think it's also
completely agree.
Yeah, it's for them to have the courage to say, okay, guys, look, Jason, I know you keep coming with me, and I know there's a lot to learn here. Gather your questions and let's have a sit down at 2:00 this afternoon and just go through all of them in one go, instead of the stop, start, because that's exhausting for any brain.
One of the things I did during COVID, because we all went to work from home, I really missed that connection. But so I set every Tuesday at 11, I had what I called office hours, and I would be on Zoom. And if no one was there, I would just continue my work. As soon as someone popped in, they had a quick question. But they knew that Tuesday from 11 to 12, I was open for anyone just to pop in. And then of course, we had our regular one-on-ones. And then also people could still chat me and go, hey, I need you for 15 minutes. So then I'd say, okay, let's talk at 3. But I think that your point is so well taken about, as managers, we're also individual contributors. We also have our work we have to get done. And so that's actually the biggest challenge that I hear from a lot of the people in my management training. Say, Shelly, all this is great, but this all takes a lot of time. Like I still have my own work to get done. And so what the advice that I give is you should be allocating though 20% of your time to people management responsibilities at least. If you have a big team, it might be more. But the key is that you need to still feel in control of your own work. So schedule your one-on-ones, make sure that you keep them unless the world is falling. And when people need you, then book the time in your calendar. Say, okay, you know what? I have time at 3. Let's do 3 to 3:15 today. And so that you're also sending the message to your people, they're important, and you want to make sure you set the time aside. But I don't have a quick and easy answer to the big question of I'm so busy, I don't know how to get everything done.
Yeah, and it could also be part of the company culture where people are just, they pull into meeting after meeting after meeting. It's just like, oh, let's have a meeting about that, right?
Yeah.
And nobody sets an agenda. Nobody knows what it is. It's just kind of a general vacuous thing we're going to talk about because we need to work on some issue. Now, I think it's just that it's understanding meeting culture within, but I guess that's a whole other episode, right?
Well, there's a great book by Patrick Lencioni called Death by Meetings. I don't know if you've heard of it.
I know
but
Patrick
it's
Lencioni, Five Dysfunctions of a Team or something or other he
yes.
wrote, right? Yeah, same guy. No, I really like him. Tabletop, I think, is his company or his consultancy group.
Anyone who's in the meeting culture should buy that book, Death by Meetings, because
Yeah.
it really does help you to feel like perhaps you're there are some techniques to get control over it. And honestly, I know exactly what that's like. And it's so frustrating, especially when you're sitting in a meeting going, you know what, my contribution of this 2-hour meeting could have been done in 5 minutes and I could leave. But I think that one of the things that I do want to mention is this this victim mentality we need to get past. Oh, I'm in so many meetings. I'm so busy. I'm this, I'm that. And it's like, you know what? No one's going to solve it for us. We need to figure this out. So what do we need to do? Do we need to go fight for more headcount in our team? Do we need to say no to some meetings? Do we need to question if we are really needed at this meeting? Do we need to push our timelines? Like, we all have an idea of what would make things better for us. So it's like, so talk about it. Talk to your manager and say, I cannot stand the fact that I am booked back to back all the time. So do I have your permission to question if I need to be in all of these things? I I think that we can only be happy in our jobs as if we feel we have some semblance of control. If we feel that we're a slave to our calendars, and then we're never going to be good leaders, right? Because we're going to resent the time that we're spending with our people rather than getting the budget submitted or whatever. So I think that attitude of control versus victim is important.
No, I think it's such a well articulated concern that many people have, right? It's that those mindsets, and when you feel your agency or your sense of autonomy is being stripped, you are going to go into a reactive survival mode.
Yep.
And that's not going to help anyone. Um, we're coming close to the top of the hour. I very respect your time, Shelly. If I may ask you, we've talked about a number of things. We've touched on a number of very important subjects. But if we had to bring it down more concisely, from your 4 decades of experience, what would you say would be the top 3 areas or actions or behaviors that a manager or leader could focus on to promote a more caring culture?
I think setting the right expectation from the top, for sure. Putting your money where your mouth is.
What do you mean by that? I know what you mean by that, but can you operationally define that maybe a little more?
So I think this whole idea of rewarding good leadership behavior, rewarding it financially, rewarding it in terms of positive recognition, talking, but also that there's a financial component there. And communicating what that really looks like. So making it real so that you talk about what good communication looks like. You talk about what empathy looks like. You talk about what emotional intelligence looks like. You talk about what setting expectations looks like. You talk about rewarding good performance, what that looks like. So it has to be real, and it has to be tangible. So this same president that I was talking about before, that I really enjoyed working with, he created something called we called it the Envision. There was 10 elements to what we wanted to have as an organization, but he brought it into real behaviors, and it was posted all over the walls. It was incorporated into our one-on-ones. It was incorporated into every town hall meeting. It was incorporated into the performance appraisals in terms of the behaviors we wanted to see. It was incorporated into the incentive plan. It was incorporated into just our regular conversations. We had action teams that were created within the organization. So one of the things was around creating more work-life balance, right? Mm-hmm. So the team, because that was part of how we wanted to have a caring organization, because that was something that had come up from the focus groups. So the team came up with quick wins and long-term strategies. So quick wins that were it was things like we had an on-site bank machine, ready-made meals to take home for dinner, on-site dry cleaning, an on-site doctor once a week, tire change service in the parking lot, ice cream truck on hot days. We had a concierge service that would actually help plan your child's birthday party for you, or get you tickets to a hockey game, or whatever it might be, right? Those were like quick wins that showed the employees we cared, we heard you, and we cared. Here's some quick things. Now let us work on some of the bigger things, like things like, do a headcount analysis. Do we have enough people in the department based on the workload, and all of that kind of thing. So I think that there has to be real, tangible evidence. That was a very long answer to a short question. Sorry.
No. I think it's good when we put some meat on the bones. All right. Otherwise, it stays too theoretical. It's exactly to your point. You want to paint a picture, right? You want people to be able to visualize. Otherwise, it's like, okay, I understand what you mean, but how does that show up? In the workplace, how do I do that? Mm-hmm. So I think you're just speaking to exactly what you were saying, is to paint a picture. And that's what I like to do on this podcast, is to bring it down to the nuts and bolts so people can use it and such. And for me, I think what's very important is one-to-ones. As we've talked about, extensively, is the one-to-one culture, to build that into the team's culture, where it is a regular sit down. It doesn't have to be an hour. It can be just 15 minutes once every second week. But that's what, 30 minutes, or even if it's 30 minutes, it's only each time, twice a month. It's 60 minutes. It's a 60-minute investment in your people. And it's a forum where you can get feedback about your leadership and how you can support them. It's a place where they can feel listened to and connect to. It creates transparency, credibility, trust, psychological safety, and the key word, also, it's a caring space, right? And when you get to the end of the year with that performance appraisal we talked about, well, it's just another conversation. There's no surprises. And as you said before, I think you said they go the extra mile, right? They'll bend over backwards, that loyalty. Yep. They will clock the OT when they have to, right? The overtime. I shouldn't use acronyms, but the overtime, right?
That discretionary effort is actually an indicator. It's an indicator of engagement. and, like you said, loyalty. But people are not going to engage or act or that discretionary effort if they don't feel cared about. They'll do the basics.
Well said. Well said. Well, Shelly, it's been a blast having this conversation with you, and it's good, for me as a consultant slash sparring partner, where I'm in and out of sparring partners, to hear that a lot of the things that I try to encourage managers and leaders to do is backed up by 4 decades of deep experience knowledge. So thank you for having my back there. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for the opportunity. It was such a pleasure talking with you.
It was a true pleasure to speak with Shelly Brown about how we can create stronger, more resilient workplaces through self-awareness, self-compassion, and a caring for others. Now, there are a number of salient takeaways from this episode, but there's 3 that kind of stood out for me. The first one is investing in emotional intelligence. And what that means is not always promoting people just based on their technical competencies, their deep knowledge, but it's also to consider the psychosocial emotional intelligence of those people. Ideally, it would be great to promote someone on their technical capabilities, but also someone who has that ability to communicate, collaborate, and cooperate. Because if you can find that dynamics, well, you significantly improve team dynamics and morale. I think a second salient point for me was to promote continuous feedback. That could be through one-to-ones that are connected like a red thread. So by the end of the year, when you have that performance appraisal, well, that's just the end stop of a number of conversations. So nothing comes as a surprise. And a third salient point for me was to encourage career development. Now, Shelly stressed the value of supporting employees' career growth, their development, by understanding their interests and offering opportunities for development. Because this not only boosts engagement, but it also helps retain talent within the organization, within the team. As you probably already surmised, Shelly is a deep well of information and experience. Her personality is very engaging and vibrant. And if you're curious to learn more, you can reach out to Shelly on LinkedIn or her website, 9boxhr.ca. But I'll leave all her contact information in the show notes for you guys. And Shelly, a personal thank you from me to you. Thank you for such an engaging conversation. I learned so much, and it kind of emphasized some of the things that I focus on. I'm on at least the right trail. So thank you again for your time and sharing your knowledge and experience. Folks, we are near the finishing line of yet another episode. If you think that someone you know might benefit from this episode, please share it with them. And if you have the time, go into Apple or Spotify or whatever podcast platform you use, please leave a rating and a comment. It really helps me to boost the algorithms to find the show. Well, folks, thank you for showing up. I will see you on Friday for Bite Size Fridays. And until then, keep well, keep strong, and we'll speak soon.